Okay, folks, good morning. Tuesday, September 17th staff meeting. Got a couple things on the agenda today. Let's get to work. Mr. Stoltz.
A couple of small things. Well, we have two things on the agenda. First, we'll have Mr. Stonehouse get up from Department of Corrections and talk about some grant outcome reports, juvenile and adult. And then the real trouble starts after that, because then we have planning, and they have a number of things to talk about today, including event centers, Airbnbs, and some notification signage. I think Scott's and his team are going to cover all that. So that'll be a little bit lengthy, but so Steve, start us up. And
hey, good morning, Steve. Welcome.
Start the department. Annually, you approve a budget and a comprehensive plan for adult and juvenile corrections. This morning, we're going to tell you the outcomes that we've been working on for the past year, and this report will go on to KDOC. It's been through the advisory boards, and now it's coming to you for information. I'll start with adult field services, and then Mario will do juvenile services. So, adult field services, we have one goal, and that is to achieve or maintain a success rate of 75%. That's a state law. So that's our main goal that we try to achieve. We've never achieved it, but they do have a caveat that if we can make at least 3% increase from the year before that, it'll come fast. You can see the last year, we came in at 55% success rate. The year before that was 52, so we made it. And 58 and 63%. Quite frankly, the 63% was during COVID, so that there was a lot of shutdowns and inability to really supervise folks real closely. So that's a number is probably as good as the paper is written on at the time. If we want to break down the closures a little bit, we closed 653 folks in 24, and 293 of them were unsuccessful. The largest number of them was for a new misdemeanor offense, followed by a condition offense. That's when they're not following the rules of their probation, or they may abscond, they might run away and not tell us where they are. And then 10% were revoked for a new felony. So that's of the folks who are not completing, that's what the breakdown looks like. The way we're going to do this is this objective. And the first part is using program referrals and graduated responses and incentives. Utilizing part of our strategic plan was to increase utilization of partner agencies who offer programs that we don't do in the Department of Corrections. We want to focus on supervising folks and then refer people out for substance abuse treatment, anger management, things like that. In-house, we do provide our own Better's intervention program, which is sponsored by the Attorney General's office. It's a very specific set of counseling. So we offer that in-house just because it's so hard for providers to meet the qualifications outside in the community. When we talk about incentives, we are required to work towards 4 positives for every 1 negative. So anytime somebody, we really want to focus on acting like a coach with our people that we supervise, instead of just a referee, instead of just catching them when they do wrong, help them understand when they're doing something right, help them realize it, see it, and then enforce it. We've partnered with a national organization called Justice System Partners, who have a grant through the National Institute of Justice, NIJ, to work on the organizational coaching model. We are a site with San Francisco and the state of Michigan. We're a local site. San Francisco is a city site, and Michigan obviously is a state site. So they give us technical assistance as we move forward from being just a referee to being a coach with folks. So that's really how we are working to make that happen. And we use random audits, response forms that people fill out, case reviews, incentives, referral to our programs. And then if somebody has really met their maximum benefit with us, they'll go back to court services if they have lower level offenses and they're no longer high risk. So this is how we check what our staff are doing, is through these measures. We also have a continuous quality assurance team whose job is to observe and train on the skills interacting with clients one-on-one. That's something new for us. We've only been doing it for about a year or so to try to increase our positive outcomes. Because at some point we want to, KDOC does tie our success rate to funding. So if we would not make our outcomes, they would reduce our funding. So we don't want that to happen. Along with quality assurance, we provide ongoing training and coaching in the use of EPICS, which is the effective practices of community supervisions, tools and risk assessments. We have quarterly auditing, and then we train to what folks are deficient on in their supervision of clients. We ensure that groups are being done to fidelity through observations and coaching of staff. And then we have monthly quality assurance audits on the EPICS tools, the one-on-one interactions between clients and their supervision officer. So in a nutshell, that's what we have accomplished in the last year to try to improve our successful outcome in adult supervision. Any questions about that?
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that update. Any questions?
Now Mario will tell you about juvenile.
1 second, Steve. Commissioner Howe?
Just want to back up to the very beginning. So use the word success,
Yes,
but it's not really defined anywhere here. What do you mean by the word success specifically?
they didn't go to prison.
That's it?
For KDOC, yes, that's the definition. Our definition for this program is they didn't go to prison, because that's why community corrections exists, is to divert folks from prison. Our success rate is looking at successful case closure in the community. So somebody under the other, if you don't go to prison and you go to jail and just serve out the rest of your probation in jail, that's a success because they didn't go to prison. So
you're saying in this case, in the opposite of these numbers here, they did go to prison.
yes,
Wow. And these are violations, correct?
yes,
Are these folks that are basically in a program that essentially the program failed, but they didn't go in prison anyway? So
the program failed or they were not right for the program.
but they were in the program for at least a while.
Yes, so
And
we
the
least a
hope
while.
was this was going to work for them, but it didn't work.
Right now, we are looking at how long it takes someone to fail in the program. And something like, Lori just told me this morning, something like 40% fail within 6 months. So that's either not good engagement with the program failed them, or they were not right for it. The number of folks that we have who are presumptive prison is very high. And the number of our new admits who are presumptive prison, if it weren't not for this program, they go to prison, is very high. So that's why we're really focusing on the work between our ISOs and our individuals, because that's the only way we can help try to break that behavior chain.
For someone to be qualified for this attempt to keep them out of prison, what type of crimes have they committed in the past that qualifies them to be eligible for this type of management of their case versus just going to prison in the first place? What kind of crimes are we talking about that are in this program?
It would probably be anything except for first-degree murder. Otherwise, the judge has, unless it's a mandated prison sentence, the judge has the authority to depart and put them on ISP.
Are there violent offenders in this list?
Yes,
If they reoffend, I assume there's similar crimes being committed. Again, we're trying to manage them in the community. And another crime that's of violent nature occurs in the community while they're in this program. That's happening then.
I think the number was 10% were a felony new charge.
Okay, well, I guess okay. I appreciate the briefing this morning. I don't know that I guess the reason we're doing this primarily is because there is I would hope to say that we're very successful at keeping people from going to prison and that they don't reoffend. These numbers were much higher. I would feel a lot better about that, but these numbers aren't that high. Makes me wonder, we're spending quite a bit of money trying to help someone not go to prison. It turns out we have more victims in the community. I guess you have to kind of judge the whole program. Is this really the right solution to the problem? I don't know. So
community corrections have been around since the eighties. So that's been the state's attempt at diverting folks from prison since the eighties. That's the Community Corrections Act.
I understand that. I guess my assumption would be that these are more programs that are transitioning people from incarceration back to community. I mean, there's a time when their time in, incarceration is coming to an end and they have to be transitioned back to society. And we want to make sure we do that in a very careful way, giving them the tools they need to be successful. But if we're just simply offsetting criminal sentencing to do this, again, if this was a really successful program, I would feel better about this. But I guess if that's the intent, is that we just don't have space in our prisons, for example, and this is causing us to do it this way, and yet we create more victims and more cases, and then there's more things that happen because someone's not being because we're hoping someone doesn't do something wrong in the community. I guess I've got some concerns about this is such a large part of how we handle people that do violent crimes. This is a large number of people. I don't know, we don't see, these are all percentages. I'm not sure how many people we're talking about, how many cases and that type of thing. So
653 closures, 293 unsuccessful, 29 new felony charges.
that's for 2024.
Yes, that ended in June 30th.
And this is just for Sedgwick County,
Just for such man.
293 unsuccessful.
Yes.
It'd be nice to know of that 293, say 10%. So roughly 30 people
Yes.
have been victimized because of this. Because we had someone out in the community, we were trying to keep them from going back to prison, but there's 30 victims in our community that are, there's a subsequent case, another victim out there that's harmed in some way, physically harmed. I have some concerns about that. All right, thank you.
Steve, question. This 55% number, how is that relative to other counties in the state, other programs? Do we have any?
It's lower than the majority of the state.
We have a larger number,
We have a
correct?
larger number and we have a different population
Correct.
than because of some of the things that Commissioner Howell is alluding to, the people who are presumptive prison is a higher percentage of the folks that we get on new intakes.
Does this include any work release numbers or is that a complete separate program?
County work release?
No,
No, it's a completely different program.
Completely
Those are the folks coming back from prison.
reintegrating.
Yeah. In our work release, some of these folks are there. Those are programs that we can make referrals to try to help them be successful.
Right. Okay. Very helpful. Thank you.
Steve, do we have data on the 30 new felony arrests? Do we have data on what types of crimes they committed?
We can certainly get
Whether
that.
they were victim crimes or whether they were victimless, whether they were felony drug cases or whether they were,
And certainly, we
physical
can certainly
assault or something.
break that out further and see what that looks like.
we might look into that a little bit to see if they are, in what way society was victimized by those 30, just so we understand.
And Steve, what's the origination of the 75% goal from the state? How
This
does
is state law.
they just pull it out of the air or
It's from the 80s, I do believe, too.
it's never
It's
changed?
never changed.
This is one reason last year that there was a strong lobby to receive more funding from the state to support these programs. And there was a $5 million influx of dollars for community corrections across the state to improve staffing and to allow them the opportunity to improve programming for these offenders to try to help them be more successful.
I mean, I could argue that we're 50-50 right now. It seems like about half of these people we're helping. I'd argue that's not too bad. I mean, although the state has set an artificial 75% goal.
We've been lower.
Yeah. Oh.
But that's why we're doing something different in this coaching model. Instead of just watching people reoffend, we're trying to actually intervene in their behavior to see
If you didn't have this, the outcome is you're just more in prison.
Yes.
Or they're going to fail at a way higher clip than a 50% fail.
The other side of that is if there's not room at the state prison, then they're going to outsource and send them out of state, or else they're going to leave them sitting in the county jail. And the county jail is going to be the first option
That's option one.
that they spend more of their sentence in the county jail waiting for a bed to open at the state level. So that's not good for the county.
I know you don't have that data on, and I know you're going to give us data on the 30 new felony charges, but of the 293 unsuccessful, just your read, Steve, are these predominantly drug charges?
A good chunk of them would be, well, the 40% are condition violators. It's most likely drug charges.
Okay.
Related to their use. And most likely this is the first time they do it, they do not get revoked.
Okay.
The court will allow them to try it again or do something different.
I'm just a suggestion, Tom, Rusty, when we have our en banc with the city on public safety, I think that data would be very relevant for the conversation. To understand what factors are influencing these things. And if there's things on a local level we could do, or on a state level, we could advocate for some of these outcomes.
Well, we do know that specialized programs like drug court deal with folks with serious substance abuse much better than traditional probation. So there is programming that we can provide to folks, but it's limited just because we don't have unlimited amount of slots for people,
Correct.
everybody to be in drug court. It's the most folks with the most serious substance abuse issues.
Yeah, let's revisit that. Thank you, Steve.
I have a
Go ahead.
question. So we're talking about this today. What spurred the discussion today?
It's this report is due to KDOC on the 1st of October.
Okay, so you do this every year?
Yes.
Okay. And I assume they compile the results for the state of Kansas. Is there state reports that go out after that they compile this data from the various counties?
Maybe.
I guess I'd be interested to know, since the legislature, obviously they're funding a lot of this, there's a lot of their requirements and it's their stated goals. And obviously we're not meeting the goals that's stated goals at least. And I don't know if they're content to just be where we're at or if they plan on making changes. I mean, it'd be good to know if they're looking at NCSL for other states. What does other states do in this population? And second of all, is there not a post-audit report that's relevant? You said this has been going on since the 80s. Surely there's got to be some post-audit reports that talks about whether this is financially the smartest way to handle this problem. And again, if there's a way to create productive reintegration into the community, that's obviously a great outcome. But we also have to balance that with the fact that there may not be this may not be an effective solution in every case. And so there needs to be a lot of thought as to what's the best way to handle each and every case and try to normalize that. But I'm not so sure this is exactly where we need to be. Sounds to me like this. I know you said this is pretty good numbers. Again, it depends on how you look at this glass half full. It's a glass half full or half empty. I'm not so sure that 50% is necessarily a good number. I mean, you might think it's great, but I don't know that I'm happy with that. And I think if there's a post-audit report, we ought to take a look at that too, especially before this en banc.
Yeah.
And see if there's a post-audit report. Surely there must be.
I don't know if they've ever done. The last one I know about was on the juvenile system, but I don't know about if they've ever done this on community corrections.
Well, we ought to at least, ask for them to take a look at this because there's a lot of taxpayer money involved. We're trying to actually provide enough space to do things the best way, whatever that best way is. I think right now with the juveniles, we've gone, in my personal opinion, we've gone soft on the issue so much we're actually creating our own problems. And I think we need to go back the other way again. But I feel like maybe some of the adult treatment is kind of going down the same path. I don't know how much of this has changed recently, or if this is long, you go back 4 years here, but some of these ideas were developed in the 1980s. As this evolved, has gotten softer, and we've become trying to do this more in the community because we lack prison space. If that's what's causing this to happen, I want them to be aware that this is a consequence of them not funding a corrections system. And if there's not a lack of space, but they think this is just more effective, I'd like to have them say that. I'd like to be able to see that in the data. I want to know what's causing this. I guess my thought would be, is 50% considered a good program? 75% would be a lot better, but 50% doesn't to me sound like doesn't sound to me like we should be content just to say, well, it's 50%, let's just move on. I don't know if I like that number. I think we could do better than that. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks
So
for
we'll
that,
hear from
Steve.
Mario on the
Thank you.
juvenile system.
Okay. Mario, welcome, bud.
And Commissioners, Mario Salinas, Deputy Director of Juvenile Programs. Steve mentioned I'm here to cover the SFY 24 Juvenile Comprehensive Plan year-end outcomes. This is an annual requirement as part of the grant application. These reports provide stakeholders with information that can help improve efficiencies and services, assist in effectively allocating resources, and strengthening agency risk reduction practices. Annually, Juvenile Community Corrections Advisory Board, or Team Justice, and the Board of County Commissioners shall review and sign off on the year-end outcomes. Team Justice approved these outcomes on August 2nd of this year. Our first KDOC funded program is the Juvenile Intake and Assessment Center, or JIAC. They serve youth ages 10 to 17 that have been arrested or come in on a notice to appear or an agreement to appear. This agency and program runs 24 days or 24 hours a week, 7 days a week, and is ran by 13 FTEs. On average, we serve 145 intakes per month. And JIAC's mission is to connect referred youth and families with appropriate services in order to limit their involvement with the juvenile justice system. So that being said, with our mission, our first goal for JIAC is to achieve a 67% or higher referral initiation rate. Objective 1 is to increase that referral rate by 5% from calendar year 22 to 62% in calendar year 23. And just for clarity, JIAC makes referrals on 100% of youth that come in through their front door that score moderate to high risk that are not already connected to services. So when we're talking about initiation rate, those are those referrals that have been made that we're following up with that youth and family to ensure that they're following up with the referral and actually engaging in that referral. Objective 1, some action steps were to achieve this goal and increase the number of initiation was follow-up letters that we sent to families. We toured a lot of these referral agencies, and then we also invited those referral agencies to come to JIAC to understand the work that we do, as well as to identify what area that they could help the youth that we serve and identify them as that referral source. Objective 2 is for staff to understand their personal role and their referral rates. So each staff is responsible to make those referrals on the intakes on all 3 shifts at JIAC. So we wanted to make sure that we're getting up-to-date data as far as with referral agencies, seeing who's actually contacting them to follow up on those referrals that were made at JIAC. And so we were able to get monthly data from those referral sources, as well as supervisors were able to coach staff and making sure that those staff are providing referrals on a regular basis. That being said, goal 1 was met. The referral rate at the time of this report was 67%. 67% of youth or families followed up with those referrals. And since the time of this report, it's actually increased to 70%. So we're right on track with that goal. So we want to make sure that we're providing those resources to youth and families that come through the front door. JIAC goal 2 goes hand in hand with that. We want to use evidence-based practices at JIAC. And to do that, we use brief intervention tools, or BITs, as well as motivational interviewing, because youth that come through our door, they don't essentially owe us anything. We want to build that rapport with them. And then we are able to do that with the BITS tools, as well as motivational interviewing, because we want to build upon the spirit of MI to make sure that they understand that this is a partnership. We want to offer them the services to keep them out of the juvenile justice system, and getting their buy-in with these referral agencies is ultimately going to increase that initiation rate from goal 1. So this goal was met. Evidence-based practices continue to be utilized at JIAC. Staff are working with the continuous quality improvement team that Steve had mentioned. That's new to our department, to provide ongoing training, as well as motivational interviewing training throughout the year. Our next program is the JIAC Immediate Intervention Program. This is a fairly newer program, and it's part of JIAC. So these staff serve dual roles. They're intake officers on the JIAC side, and then they also manage a caseload on the Immediate Intervention Program. Essentially what this is the state's attempt at diversion. And so we currently have our district attorney's diversion program. So this is an alternative to that. So that being said, we do send identified youth that come through JIAC. We send those referrals to the district attorney's office. They review those referrals, and then they let us know if they would be acceptable for the IIP program. The mission for IIP is to provide referred youth and their families with immediate intervention in order to limit their involvement in the juvenile justice system. Ultimately, the program is 16 weeks long. During that time, IIP staff monitor the youth's police contact, and then we hold multidisciplinary team meetings if they're having behavior problems at home, if they're exhibiting some criminogenic type behaviors out in the community. We want to staff those cases with their parent, guardian, any referral agencies out in the community to make sure that we're getting them back on track. The one goal for IIP, because they are clustered with the JIAC outcomes as well. Their goal is to maintain successful completion of 90% in SFY 24. To do that, we wanted to incorporate those best practices as well as update and increase staff's knowledge on motivational interviewing. Ultimately, this goal was met at 96%, successfully completed the IIP program. Our numbers were a lot lower this year compared to last year due to Odyssey being down and us not being able to process those referrals as we did in prior years. This year, we served 78 families. Of those, 75 successfully completed the IIP program. Whereas last year in SFY 23, we served 147 families and 143 of those were successful. So we're hoping now that Odyssey's back up and running that we can serve more families in SFY 25. The last program that's KDOC funded has 3 sub-programs. The first one being the Juvenile Intensive Supervision Program. This is an intensive community-based program providing services to offenders out in the community. The next one is the Juvenile Correctional Facility. ISOs provide case management services to youth sentenced to the Juvenile Correctional Facility. And then the last one is conditional release. These are the youth that were in the Juvenile Correctional Facility, and for the juvenile term, they are released on conditional release. In the adult world, this is considered parole. So juvenile field services serves these 3 populations through state funding. The JFS Goal 1 was to reduce the number of probation violations filed. Objective 1 was to increase the number and variety of incentives offered. As Steve mentioned, it's the same in the juvenile world as the adult world. Our goal is to have 4 incentives for every response. This past year in SFY 24, we issued 1,223 incentives, compared that to 492 graduated responses. So we're close to a 2.5 to 1 ratio, not quite to the 4 to 1, but we've made a significant increase from last year where we were at 900 incentives and now we're at 1,223. So we're continuing to make progress in that area. We are getting with the clients that we serve to identify an incentive that would work for them to be more motivated to reach those goals. So for like March Madness, centering that around basketball, different parts of the year, holidays, or in the summertime, things for like swimming or outdoors activities, trying to get them more excited about those incentives so they will work harder to be successful in the program. So we're continuing to make improvements in that area, as well as continued staff development with the EPICS tools. That's effective practices in correctional settings. Those are the tools that staff use. If a client comes in, has a violation, we use these tools to work with them to identify what they did was a violation and to correct that behavior moving forward. So it is not a repeat behavior. Ultimately, this goal was not met. PVs increased in SFY 24. Part of this had to do with an increase in the number of AWOLs and new offenses right when they were placed on juvenile intensive probation. So we're working with the clients and trying to get them set up in services, whether that be in the evening reporting center or out in the community. And then, as Steve mentioned, we do have a partnership with Dr. Levens and the JSP program to work on that new initiative of the coach versus referee as well. JFS Goal 2 is to strengthen partnerships with service providers and stakeholders. Objective 1 is to continue those partnerships we currently have. We do this by having regular communication with our partners. They come to weekly staff meetings, and then they also staff cases with ISOs to make sure we're all on the same page and we're working together simultaneously and having that open line of communication. The next objective is to work with new providers out in the community. I know Steve and I, we continuously meet with grassroots organizations, identify where they can partner with us, as well as looking into other grant opportunity options for those providers that want to collaborate with us with KDOC grant funds that are out there. For the new partnerships in SFY 24, a couple examples of those are we have a partnership with Dr. Polite, school halls, not prison walls. And then we also have a partnership with Goodwill Industries and their group with the WSU Tech Next Step program. So those are two good ones that we have been working with this past year, and we're looking at future opportunities as well with those partnerships. So this goal not only is a KDOC goal, but also a strategic plan goal for the department to collaborate with existing partners and also expand on those in the future. And then goal 3 is to improve creating impactful case plans. If you remember, we had a KDOC audit last year, and one of the things that we needed to work on were improving our case plans and making those a living document, making sure we're reviewing those at every office visit, making sure we are collaborating with the youth, family, and community agencies. And so that was our goal 3 for juvenile field services, making sure that we have specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and within a time constraint, SMART goals for those case plans. ISOs collaborate with the youth and families, their therapists and counselors to ensure we have those buy-ins, and then also to address any responsivity factors or barriers that youth may have out in the community. Maybe they can't get to and from work or to treatment. We provide, I would say, probably 96 to 97% of transportation for all youth that go to the evening reporting center. We pick them up on a regular basis. They go there, they eat, and they go to programming throughout the day, and then we take them back home. So we're constantly trying to remove those barriers and make them successful in our programming. So that being said, for SFY 24 ISP successful closures, we were at 71% in this past state fiscal year for ISP cases. That's compared to 59% last year. So we have a significant increase in that area. Regarding conditional release and JCF, we're at 60% this past year, and last year we were at 62%. And then all clients combined this year, we're at 68% compared to 60% last year. So we're making some positive strides, and we hope to continue that upward tick. Just to put it in perspective, of these successful closures this year and last year, post 12-month release, we were at 97% that did not commit future crimes within 12 months for the ISP population, and there were 0 for CR and JCF. So making some positive strides. But that being said, this is the annual requirement, and so we just asked that you authorize the chair to sign.
Okay. Mario, thanks for the report. Any questions, comments? I just want to, I don't have a question, I have a comment. I just want to publicly thank you and Steve, and some of the conversations have been ongoing about in the foster care system, some of the children that have behavioral health challenges that are above and beyond what most foster families can handle. These are the gaps that oftentimes we hear about: children sleeping in Ember Hope's offices, or formerly St. Francis's offices. These are the kids that the foster families can't seem to handle. The behavioral challenges are not criminal, but they're just beyond what foster families can handle. And I just want to publicly thank you guys who have been at the table working on the solution with DCF, with Ember Hope. So just thank you. This is a very, very difficult discussion, and there's no easy answers, but you guys have been at the table to help shape some of these outcomes. I just want to publicly thank you.
All right. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay. That's corrections. Okay. Appreciate that. So Tom, this will be on the agenda. Or do we just, is this
So
on a
if there-
consent or
When commission approved the grants
this is just part of the?
for last fiscal year, you were authorized to sign all documents. They're required to bring this forward to the advisory boards. And then for your information and knowledge, a form will come to your office for you to sign based on the prior approval for you to sign all documents. related to
Understood.
the grant.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Next up, Scott Wadle.
Good morning, Scott Wadle from the Planning Department. Good to see you all. Thanks for having me here. Should I just launch right in?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. So excited about this opportunity. We've got three things to touch base with you on, and that is short-term rentals, event centers in the county, and development application signs. I would emphasize that all three of these are draft. All three of them are in varying states of development. Since we were going to be here anyway for one of them, we figured we'd bring all of them and to get your feedback. Now, the timing of this meeting is really helpful because, of course, it allows us to know if we're on track to meet the needs of the community. And if we're not, it allows us to adjust course. So very grateful for this opportunity. We've been in process with, as you've heard, with a number of these. And so, again, it's the first time that a lot of people are seeing these. In terms of credit, I do want to credit a number of folks. I'm not going to list them individually because I'm afraid I might miss someone, but we've had staff from MABCD, staff from the counselor's office, staff from planning working on this. There are other departments that we additionally also need to coordinate with, but just know if you like what you see today, it's because these folks on the team are working on it. If you don't like what you see today, that's because of me and I need to do a course correction. So we'll work on that. But in any case, the other thing too is we've gotten you PowerPoints. There have been some small adjustments to those. So as you're going through, if you see something slightly different, just know that we did some adjustments this morning. Okay, with that, we'll take it away with short-term rentals. All right, so again, we're here to collect feedback and get your thoughts, answer any questions that you've got. In terms of an overview, these are the things that we'll go through today. The first one being, so what's the issue? Well, the issue quite simply in the unincorporated county is that short-term rentals, as we think of them, staying at a house, staying at a carriage house that's part of a property, they're simply not allowed in Sedgwick County per the zoning code in most instances. If you've got commercial zoning, then yeah, you'd be good. But in terms of residential zoning, no, it's just not allowed unless you're staying for more than 7 days. So in terms of the context, are we alone in wrestling with this? And no, certainly not. We know that communities all across the country are wrestling with this. We also know that the city of Wichita recently adopted changes. So lots of communities are looking to see what is the right fit for short-term rentals in their community. So in terms of background, well, for the process, we had the staff meeting in November. We also did we did some research that we presented to the MAPC that was included as part of that staff meeting. And then you considered, because of the joint nature of your code with City of Wichita, the Unified Zoning Code, you considered the City of Wichita's amendments back in December. So when we talk about short-term rentals, what are we talking about? It's generally a residential dwelling unit or structure to provide rooms or a room or rooms for temporary lodging. This also includes bed and breakfast in the city. So just so we're all talking about the same thing, these are typically things that you would think of as Airbnb, VRBO, those types of facilities. These are some examples. These are not necessarily in Sedgwick County, but I just thought they look like fun to give an example of it. Fire pit seems really nice right now, but okay, possible regulations. So we're going to jump to the heart of it. So as I'm going through these, as always, please stop, ask questions. This is to get feedback. We're going to see what you think. So possible regulations. One thing would be to add the definition of short-term rental in the county, very similar to what the city has. No shocks there. In terms of an approval process, it would be 2 routes that a property owner could use. They could do an administrative permit or they could do a conditional use. And I'll explain what the difference is in that, but just know that the administrative permit is a more streamlined process. The conditional use is a more robust process for review. And this is a significant one at the very bottom, which is that they would be valid for 5 years. So after 5 years, a property owner would come back in and have to make another application to get the approval. This is different. This is a different feature than how the city of Wichita does it, because Wichita has a licensing program. With this option, we've not explored a licensing program. We've stuck with just zoning.
Scott, how many, real quick?
Yeah.
How many Airbnb or short-term rental properties in the city of Wichita again?
Oh, over 500, like 550.
Okay.
And I've got some new information. So we've been trying to, well, we reached out to the vendor to see if they could provide us with a quick number for the unincorporated county. We're not there yet, but what they did say is that there's minus the city of Wichita, there's approximately 100 short-term rentals in the county. Now, if you subtract out all the other small cities, you end up with a pretty low number for what's in the unincorporated county. Don't have that yet, but we're working on it.
Okay.
The other cities, Bel Airs, Derby's of the world.
That's correct. That's what that 100 number, 100 includes all of those too. So, yeah. Okay, everyone ready for the next one? Okay, here we go. All right, so permitted in a resident, so it's got to be a residential unit or a accessory apartment. You can't do this in a warehouse. That it could be permitted as a primary accessory use, so someone could use the property as their residence and then have a short-term rental with it. So I've got that combination, and would not be permitted in a recreational vehicle. Again, I really like Airstreams, but unfortunately, to match up with the rest of our zoning code, not allowed as part of this. Then in terms of contacts that the owner operator, so they can designate an operator, would live within 30 miles of the short-term rental, be available generally 24/7 so that we can give them a call, let them know if we need them to show up at the property, answer questions, and they would be required to post their contact information in the short-term rental. Then this one is a little bit unique, that no gatherings of more than 20 adults at the property. And that's it, for the purposes of this, it would be anyone 12 years of age or over. And if this would apply, this restriction would apply if they could, go through the conditional use process and request for this to be waived. But at that point, it would be considered by the MAPC, by the.
So so this subsection, an adult, so you're saying no one under the age of 12?
No. Under the age of 12, we just don't count them.
Oh,
towards that
understood.
number.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. Yep. And then, as always, any inspections could be done. So we've got the ability to go and do inspections. That it would be limited to residential uses. So you can't rent one of these and open up a manufacturing business or something, different like that. That there would have to be trash service associated with it and the adequate number of receptacles. That's a little bit unique, but something that was needed, we felt. And then got to be in compliance with all the codes. So that's the text portion. Now we'll kind of move through the flow diagram and talk about the review process. So everyone good so far?
The only thing I didn't see, are these assessed at residential or commercial?
That is a great question. And we have talked with the appraiser, and I believe the counselor's office has also been involved in some of those conversations. And the answer is, I would say it depends. I can tell you from experience, though, that in the city of Wichita, and I believe in the county, it's tied to also the state definition of Airbnb, which is up to, I think, something about the number. It's the number of rooms. I think it's like 6 or 8 in that ballpark. And if it's under that, then it's residential. If it's above that, then it's assessed at something different.
Interesting.
And I think that is an area of discussion for consideration with the legislative agenda, perhaps, if you want to see changes to that. And I'm going to look back to legal and make sure that. Okay. If not. Sam to the rescue.
With respect to, let's see, the PBD has given guidance that it's going to be more than 6 bedrooms. And that's where the taxes would go in. And then the city taxes ordinance contains a provision that says that a short-term rental is anything or transient tax guests would apply only to short-term rentals that have more than eight bedrooms.
Okay.
Mm.
So they will assess the transient tax like they do at hotels if it has 9 rooms.
Yes,
That's a big place.
yes.
That's interesting.
And of course, ours haven't gotten to that yet, but our definitions of short-term rentals and the Charter 59 is the county's transient guest tax. And it only provides that that tax is applicable if we have more than 2 bedrooms in the short-term rental, if we approve short-term rentals in the county.
That's helpful. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam. Yes, thank you for sticking close by. So there's 2 moving parts to that. There's how they're appraised in terms of property taxes, but then there's also the transient guest tax that I guess are under discussion. So any other questions? We're good? Okay. So in terms of the administrative permit process, this is a streamlined process that was put together and utilized for the city, which had already existed, and it was in place in the zoning code for at least cell towers in one fashion. But here we were talking about employing it because part of the discussion that we saw in the city of Wichita is that some short-term rentals are not controversial. And there had been some concerns by short-term rental owners that placing a sign and alerting folks to the fact that there's a property that's been furnished but is not occupied on a regular basis could lead to some other issues. So what we did is we used this process to figure out which ones are controversial, and if they're not controversial, they get approved, and if they are, then they go through the conditional use process. And here's how it works. So the first step is that they would submit their application. Then the second part is that there's a notification that goes out to abutting and contiguous properties. And I'll show you some graphics to show you how that works. And then there's a 14-day period where they can decide whether or not they want to protest and have the option to submit those. And so if more than 50% of the owners of abutting and contiguous properties submit a protest, then it's considered to be controversial and it goes to the conditional use process, or at least maybe not controversial, but at least open, ripe for discussion, maybe is a better way of putting it. If it's lower than that, then if it's 50% or less, then it is approved. So, and it streamlines the process by taking it from about a 90-day process to go through the whole zoning process instead to be somewhere in the ballpark of 3 weeks. So.
Is the streamlining idea because of the number of potential applications is that part of the motivation?
That was part of it.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, with 550 cases, we
yes.
would, yeah.
Correct.
So here's an example from the city. I've got county examples, but I wanted to start here because it shows you. So if the orange property, the property with the orange outline is the applicant property, then all the abutting and contiguous are the properties that would touch or do touch if you minus the roads. So in this case, you can see all the ones with blue. So here are some county examples of that. This one's a little bit unique because it's got this property in the middle, which technically does not touch. It's its own property. So here's another one. You can just kind of see how this plays out in different scenarios. And here's another one. So in terms of the protest, it would be handled very similar to a zoning case protest where all of the owners of a property need to sign off on the protest. So if it's a husband and wife, both of them need to sign it.
Can we have some clarification? So if only
Yes, sir.
one signs it, then it doesn't count.
That's correct. It's invalid.
And it's not based on how much land you have. It's just that you're adjacent. Each property has
Correct.
up to 2 owners. If there's only one person owns that property, they can sign on their own.
That's
Still
right.
Be qualified.
Mhm.
Like that last map you showed, there was a large property to the left on the map there.
Mhm.
That's still just, they don't actually have to live on the property, but they own the property. Makes them, they could oppose this if they wanted to.
That's correct. Yep.
Thank you.
So a couple other notes here, a few other notes is number one, the monitoring service. This is a service that the city is contracted with a company to do this because short-term rentals, you don't know what the addresses are. So you have to have someone to help you out with that. And that's what a company Granicus does for the city of Wichita. We've talked about whether or not that would be a good idea or a good fit for the county. At this point, we're not recommending it. And I think part of that is just because number one, we operate generally on a complaint basis. So we'll see if complaints come in, and generally the number of them is so low. But I do want to tell you, if you are interested in that, so that we would know with more certainty where they are located, that's certainly a service that we could look into. So the other thing too is I've already covered it, but it's complaint based. So enforcement would be based on complaints. And then again, it's a 5-year cycle of applications, because if they come through, they're valid for 5 years and then they come back. Part of that to consider though is with it being a zoning case, the revenues that come from that will go to the planning fund. And at the end of the year, if there's any surplus in the planning fund, it's divided in half and distributed among the city and the county. So that's all I've got on the note slide. Here's the process. In terms of the process, and again, this is an estimate, and I've got some questions for you on this one. So here we are at the staff meeting. The next step then would be to take it to the MAPC advanced plans. Then another step after that would be to engage if there's any specific stakeholders you think that we should invite to come talk with us, maybe have just go take them through the same kind of PowerPoint presentation. We certainly can do that. Question for you about, so are there stakeholders we should engage with? Also, should this go to the citizen advisory boards? Then after getting feedback, take it back to advanced plans with any changes or feedback for them to consider, to the full planning commission, and then back to you all by December. That's the way Justin likes these schedules. It's just because he has to do all the work, or a lot of the work, I should say. And speaking of work, credit to Kelly and to JR for writing out. You'll see in your packets of information that we distributed, there are draft amendments, and then you'll see the actual text of what it says. So working through that is quite a lift. So, and with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Okay. Commissioners, questions, comments?
Okay, thanks, Scott. This is a lot of work and good. So I usually don't have a lot of questions. I got a handful here.
Go for it.
So this is good. I do feel engaged in this. So the city adopted theirs.
Yep.
So if we go through the steps you had on the last slide, the city would be reconsidering whatever new thing is countywide and has to have the city of Wichita's okay to do that.
Yes. So what we would do is essentially, the city already has theirs in place. That's already in the unified zoning code. So we would really just be adding what should happen in the unincorporated county.
Okay. And a lot of that's consistent with what the city just did.
Fairly close. I think the biggest differences are that there's that they in the county, they would expire after 5 years. That's a difference. The other thing, in my mind, that's probably the most significant difference with them. The other thing too is that the city has a licensing program, but again, that's why we did the 5-year renewal in the county, is simply because that infrastructure isn't really robust. And so this is a process to allow for a review to see if things have changed.
I really like the fact that you've got defined the administrative way to get approved. I think you're paying attention to the complaints on the adjacent properties, and then that would send them to so the MAPC or the planning process is what it is. And so it's a more extensive process. I assume that there'll be, let's say they do an administrative application. There's a fee that they'll have to pay?
There is. I think it's somewhere around $225, $250.
Okay.
Okay.
And I've had a discussion with the chairman. So I was involved at the city when we passed the $2 a night bed tax with the hotels. Since our discussion, I've checked with a few of my hotel owners, and similar to previous like when the city owned the Hyatt, hotel owners didn't like the fact that government was competing against them so they believe strongly that we could or should enforce a bed tax as well on VRBOs and whatever else. Somebody's paying $100 a night, whatever it is, so $102. If we just match that, can we look legally into charging a nightly bed tax similar to what it goes to? And I would be supportive of that. That's just a fee, and I think somebody told me this is already going on in other states, so it wouldn't be unusual for the national VRBO world and things like that.
It's a good question. Commissioner Meissner and Samantha Siang in our office have done the research on this. The charter resolution number 59 that she mentioned is our transient guest tax, and we already have that in place. And if it's 2 or more lodging rooms, then that can be enough to trigger that tax applying. Right now, as Scott mentioned in his presentation, these facilities aren't lawful in the unincorporated area, so I don't believe we're getting any real transient guest tax.
Not anything real, but we get quarterly distributions. I'm able to see where they come from. There's a specialized report that only the designated finance officer county can go and look at on the state. We had 3 entities pay that transient tax for less than $1,000 in our last distribution for 3 whole months. The time before that was about $600 for 2 entities. None of them are hotels. They're all these kinds of either resort or Airbnb type places.
Okay, so
that's it for the whole county.
Okay, this may needs to have a little more finance and legal discussion, but I think the city, if it's still $2 a night, I don't know I think it is, and I think the city is the holding company or the holding agent, and then it's distributed over to parts of it or all of it goes to Visit Wichita. But I recall that. Gosh, I wish I would have. And maybe we need to engage Visit Wichita too, but I think the existing at the city is limited to all the hotels just within the city limits. So like the casino just outside the city limits is not part of that. So I would like for us to consider countywide, maybe in the non-city boundaries or something else to I think there's a revenue stream that's justified, and I don't know where that money should go or would go. I don't care. Maybe it helps our interest arena fund or something like that, because it is similar to something like that.
If you mind if I piggyback on that?
Sure.
The issue on that I in agreement there is the issue of just some fairness with the hotels. This is where I hear it from. If Jack DeBoer was still around, we'd be hearing about this. That they're having to pay a tax, a hotel bed tax, and these Airbnbs, which are disrupting their industry, rightfully so, but 550 in the city of Wichita. And then there's, if you look at the county, there's probably 700, and there's going to be more as soon as they can start applying. This is significant unfairness to lodging. So I would entertain that idea, because I do think that there's an issue of, if I'm a hoteler, and I know Airbnbs play a different set of rules. I don't know. I think that we should at least have that conversation.
Yeah. And then to add to that, a hotel has 100 rooms and they occupy 50 that night. So I think any Airbnb that has 8 rooms, and if they're renting 6 of them, then that fee needs to go. I think we just try to mirror the occupancy. I don't know how easy that would be to manage, and I don't know if we would be the holding agent for those kind of numbers. That's the stuff that's kind of.
So when you say countywide, are you saying all 20 cities plus unincorporated areas, you want to standardize across all of them, or you're saying just for the unincorporated?
No, I think standardize all across.
I think that probably would take some legislative action, because I think right now each of those individual cities have their own home rule authority to do that or not.
And
But we can
that's part of
certainly look
the
into
finance and legal stuff.
Yes, so, but
I think we need
to
head that direction. And then I think my other question was related to let me just make sure I wrote a couple. I think the last question at this point is, I know annually, I'm very familiar with the Wichita Open, and there's a number of homes near and adjacent to where the Wichita Open is housed that host players, caddies, families mainly. It doesn't do really retail visitor guests. It's more players and caddies, and they rent for, and they don't even rent. So if somebody just gives their house away, I assume that they live there and maybe give 2 bedrooms away and they come and go.
Yeah, I think the critical part here is the fee, that there's a transaction for it.
If there's not
Yeah.
a financial or a contractual obligation, then okay, good. All right, that's the questions I had so far. Thank you. But I'm for it, and I'd be glad to be a part of helping.
Go ahead, Commissioner Dance.
So how do we just learn that there is an Airbnb out there that's not following these rules and that aren't licensed by the county?
That would be on a complaint basis. So if someone turns them in and says, hey, my neighbor's operating an Airbnb, and the folks in MABCD go through the list and they see, yep, they don't have the proper zoning. So then it becomes an enforcement issue, and they get a notification. They get to see, first off, verify if that's happening, and then they get notice.
Okay. And then every 5 years, they've got to reapply. Who tracks that? Is that planning? Is it MABCD? Who's the one that's responsible? I don't want to get into the situation where the city had recently, where they don't change the things because they forget.
Great question. We don't have all the mechanics worked out yet. So I think that is an open question that we still need to resolve in terms of how do we monitor that? How do we enforce that?
Okay. That's all my questions.
Who manages, in that vein, who manages the application process? Was that in planning?
With the city?
Yeah.
So we've got 2 different entities. Zoning applications obviously come in through the planning department. For the city, it's a one and done. So once you get it, you're done. But the license is an annual license, and that is administered by finance, but it routes through multiple departments for review. And one of those being a substantial one being planning for zoning enforcement.
Okay. Commissioner Howe?
Couple of questions. So Sam, you said something a few minutes ago. You mentioned the word 2 bedrooms versus 8 bedrooms. What were you referring to specifically?
It's for the transient guest tax. Our Charter Resolution 59 provides that we can levy a tax if that rental place meets the definition and has more than 2 bedrooms, and the stay is no more than 28 consecutive days. That's when we can levy the transient guest tax.
And it brings up a lot of questions as well. All right. Do they have to register as a business then to get this? Assume for just a minute that they want to be recognized and have a permit from the government to do this short-term rental. Do they not need to have a business registered with the state of Kansas?
That has not been part of the zoning considerations. So no, we've not asked that question.
I think maybe you should. It brings up a lot of other reportable things. For example, if they are operating a business and they get this permit, and I guess, again, you also said earlier that we have a right to inspect the property then. You did say that, correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, I don't like lots of regulations, but this issue of fairness is a pretty big topic also. And, just if you're what we consider to be more traditional short-term stay facility, they're built to commercial standards. They have fire suppressions built in. They have ADA requirements. They have all kinds of things that are required for them. And I assume that they are licensed for health and safety. And that may be a random inspection, I assume, maybe an annual inspection or a periodic inspection plus potentially a random inspection to make sure they meet health and safety requirements. These sounds like they're built to residential standards, and that all this is not part of this. And so there's a lot of fairness concerns here. And if they do operate a B and B, but they're not registered, I assume a lot of that may be cash under the table. I don't know how that actually works in terms of reporting profit and that type of thing, taxes and whatever else is due. If they're registered as a business, it seems like it takes care of some of that. There should be some type of auditing documents that are available to make sure that they're being treated fairly by government, so to speak. And then I guess on the notification of properties around for approval of one of these, if it's not an individual owner, say it's a business that owns that property or it's a trust, are they notified and they have the same option as a person?
That is correct. Yes, I do.
Right. And then someone mentioned this a minute ago, but I'm not quite sure I understand. So we have 20 cities. Wichita's already talked about doing this to their satisfaction within the city of Wichita. They've had their own rules. What about the other cities in Sedgwick County? If we do this for the unincorporated, let's say the city of Goddard, for example, or city of whatever, Cheney, are they on their own, or do they potentially fall under ours, or they fall under what's the situation with other cities?
For the zoning, they are independent. They are on their own, so to speak.
And Commissioner Howe, I may supplement a little bit. I agree with Scott on the zoning component. If you're talking about the transient guest tax, I believe under the status quo and state law, in order for the county to have a countywide transient guest tax, I think for it to be applicable within any city, I think that city's governing body has to consent to it. Right now, like Lindsay mentioned, our transient guest tax in our charter resolution number 59 is only applicable in the unincorporated area. And like Lindsay had mentioned when Commissioner Meissner was asking about it earlier, to have that be different would likely require legislative change.
And right now, the transit guest tax has limited uses. Is that correct? It can only be used for certain types of spending within the government.
Off the top of my head, I forget if it is limited in any way. I don't know if Samantha happened to see that.
I believe it goes into a special, it goes into the county's general fund. So there is not a specific limitation. I believe what happens is 2% stays with the state, and then the rest goes to the county's general fund where, and I want to supplement this by saying that it's the responsibility of the short-term rental owner to collect these taxes. And we would have, the county sets up a specific fund that's called the short-term rental, whatever. And Lindsay can confirm that. But then that's when we get distributions from the state, whether it be monthly or quarterly, it'll go into that fund.
It does. It goes into the county's general fund. We actually have a specific GL in our system so that we can tell you at any point in time, going back to 2002, how much we've received each year. And all that. And like I said, I can get in and see actually where it came from every quarter.
But do we don't have any restrictions on that use of the revenue?
It's just general revenue.
In terms of my sales tax discussion, I might like maybe talk about that being part of the sales tax. Same pot of money as the sales tax revenue that we've been talking about in my resolution suggestion. And then finally, do we have is there any requirements for them to have certain type of insurance to cover guests that are basically paying to stay there?
It's a good question. I can tell you in the city of Wichita, that's covered through the licensing process. I don't believe we've got anything in the zoning code. JR's.
Yes, I'd like to know, but homeowners insurance ought to be required to be notified of paid guests that are basically using this as a money-making business. I don't think we have a good handle on that. So
yeah, good question. I don't have a direct answer for that.
I would say, I just a supplement to that, when they do on your homeowners, if you intend to use it for any commercial purpose, you're required by your insurance standards to let the insurance company know it changes your coverage. So
well, then our application should be a checkbox that says that their insurance has been notified and they have continuous coverage for that use, for that purpose.
Good. Go ahead.
I remember back, we were talking with the appraiser on this at one point. What does this do to the property designation for assessment?
hold on, just 1 second. Any properties with 6 or more bedrooms are designated as commercial properties rather than residential. And that's the guidance that was, so we'll have to report that to the appraiser's office. And and this is also based on guidance from the PVD. And there was a statute that allowed bed and breakfast to have 5 or fewer bedrooms to be treated as residentials.
And that's coming out of PVD, their state law.
Yes.
Okay, a couple last questions and then a comment. Or just skip to the comment. I think that this has got to the point that we've got to probably act on this. I mean, in my purview, and as someone who stays in probably 15 to 20 Airbnbs a year with my family, I think that we've got I think it's a property rights issue here. I think this is just a supply issue, a demand issue. I think that I have constituents in unincorporated parts of the county that had operated short-term rentals and now have ceased to operate short-term rentals and are waiting on us so they can reoperate their business. So at any opportunity to put our foot on the gas, I do think it's merited for people that are economically waiting for us to make some of these decisions. I would say some of the issues on transient tax, I have questions about the statute on the assessment, this being residential or commercial. I in my heart of hearts, I believe it should be a commercial assessed property, but I think those are separate. And I think that's going to take a lot longer to get us there. If I would like to make a recommendation that a lot that you have here, I think is really good. This is a good basis and foundation for our program. There's some other issues I think we need to tackle separately. I'd like to move us forward on the conversation and then tackle some of the transient stuff, because there is a broader conversation, particularly with Visit Wichita, that needs to be at the table to figure out how can we do some of this and the fairness issue. I think that we need to have that conversation broadly with them. But I would say that was a separate I don't think we're going to solve that in the next 4 months. Likely not going to solve that in the next 4 months. So, Commissioner Howe.
So just to make sure I understand, so if a house has 6 or more bedrooms, it's not commercial as a residential property.
No.
That's not a trigger for, okay.
I think it comes down to more about, are they renting it out in the form of a bed and breakfast, and that the state has said, okay, bed and breakfast is similar to a short-term rental. So the purpose of this new land use, which is short-term rental, we're going to say they fall under the same guidelines.
And it just also is interesting that in terms of people living in a home, we limit group homes are defined as properties that have 5 or less unrelated people. You can't have 6 or more unrelated people without having a group home zoning or whatever it is, conditional use. And so again, we're making exceptions for this. It sounds like we got up to 20 adults and who knows how many kids. So it could be unlimited number of people staying there essentially. And this is okay.
Well,
a residential property.
I think that would come down to also fire code as well.
So we have a fire code that's going to come in and say how many people each structure can have in it. We're going to do that.
You know, one of the things that we do with Wichita is we have them identify how many bedrooms there are as part of the regulations. Then we also stipulate that the number of adults is limited to 2 adults per bedroom, plus an additional 2, assuming that there's like a couch or something that would fold out. And that is the maximum number of people who can stay there for the evening. And then there's a limit on the number of people who can gather there separate from that. It's kind of it's a multiple.
And I know the wastewater system in the unincorporated sometimes is a system that requires sizing based on the number of people who are staying in the residence or the home.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another consideration to take into account. There's a lot of details here.
Okay, I'm going to make a note about the fire code and the occupancy and get back with you.
One more thing. It seemed I don't mean to be critical here, but you said 12 and under, and this said, I think this said, in other words, is it 12 or is it 11 or is it 13? Be very clear. You said, it says over 12 and you said 12
Oh,
and
goodness.
over. So which is it?
Yes. No, my apologies. It's what's written on the slide.
Okay, so I want to make sure these are intentional words because it potentially matters. And in terms of bedrooms, it's 9 or greater is going to trigger a commercial status. So it's 9 or more.
And that's for the property tax purposes.
I understand. I also make sure someone said the word 8 and they said more than 8. I want to make sure that was intentional. It's 9 or it's more than 8 means 9 or more.
More
Which
than
is very-
8 relates to the city ordinance for applying transient guest tax. More than 6 applies to for the state, which is based on the PVD guidance and state statute.
That's totally fine. I just want to make sure when we say the words more than 6, we're talking about 7 or more. I'm trying interpreting those words to make very specific.
It's 6 or more.
See, okay, so it's
I'm
6
sorry.
or more.
Yeah.
It does
Or-
matter.
To be considered residential commercial.
It's not more than 6, it's 6 or more.
Yes, 6 or more.
These are the kind of things that just drive me crazy. No offense to anybody, but words matter. I want to make sure we don't get unclear on exactly what we're talking about. That's
Sure.
all I'm saying. Thank you.
And what I'll do, really, this is prepared for the zoning portion. The financial questions and the tax questions, obviously very important. I'll make sure that we get a slide with that information for any future presentations. So
great.
we've got that.
And the 3 platforms that you register your short-term rental on a national commercial basis require you to say what your occupancy is going to be. Now, how we do that is different, but the building permit process is still residential, correct? It's still a residential building permit. So ADA requirements, things like that. It's a residential building permit. Because these are residentials that are opening themselves up to do business. So what's the next action step here? We've been talking for a year, so I want to make sure we're moving forward.
Sure. So the next step for us is going to be taking it to the MAPC advanced plans. And then again, I don't need an answer right now, but if there's any stakeholders you think we should contact, I don't know if it's people who are interested in operating a short-term rental or, sometimes we do this to kind of make sure that we're touching base with the same people that would have the regulations imposed on them. Likewise, let me know if you'd like us to take it out to the cabs. And then after that, we'll take any feedback and bring it back to MAPC advanced plans.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why can't, this is a question for Justin. Why can't unincorporated county Airbnbs, why have they stopped operation? Is it illegal to do that?
Right now, it'd be contrary to our county code provisions.
Because county code specifically says they cannot do it. Not silent on it. It specifically says they cannot do it.
It would not be a permitted use, I think is probably the best way to put it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Then to me, that puts exigency on this.
Yeah.
We've had people that have waited to.
They're waiting. Yeah. Okay.
One more then. What if we just, so I think about how we handled solar and we went moratorium. What if we went the other way and allowed them to commission allowed that to happen while we're working through all of these? And this is really complicated. Could we do something the other way where we could allow them to operate while we're figuring out the regulation on this? If it's not going to be a fast fix, and I mean,
Can I ask a question supplement to that? Did the city of Wichita allow short-term rentals to operate while they worked on their code?
We allowed the ones that were, yes, we allowed the ones that were in
Okay.
place.
I think that's a bona fide point. What would be, Justin?
I'm thinking through this. I mean, I don't know what the city did, if they took official action, if it was at a staff level.
It was-
Essentially, they didn't
it was
enforce it.
Yeah, it was enforcement. It just came down to enforcement and we indicated we knew that the city was working through the process and.
Could we, through enforcement, indicate that, we're working on the process and allow these to operate and go through these?
I think that's something that your county manager is over the staff who would enforce this in terms of writing any tickets and whatnot. And so I think if that's the will of the board, you can convey that to the manager now or subsequently, and then the manager could convey that. If you want to take formal action, you could.
I would just say, Justin, that these processes, we're not trailblazing here. These things are happening all across the country. 550 of them operating in the city of Wichita right now. We have over 100 and outside of the city of Wichita. And there are significant regulations and standards just to qualify and get listed as an Airbnb or a VRBO. It's, you don't just say, hey, you can come stay here. So I think that it would behoove our constituents while we're working on this to be able to start the process, and knowing we're going somewhere to actually streamline this. But
And it might be helpful, Chairman, to what Scott said, if the view from you or any other commissioners would be for these that may have already been operating. I mean, it's one thing, I think, to continue something that somebody's already done versus somebody who starts up and tries to kind of get it under the wire, if that makes sense. But I think that's the theory the city probably used on this a few years ago.
But we have a lay of the land of a handful that have been operating and then stopped operating based on our actions. And that I do agree, we wouldn't open it wide open, but
Just to supplement, we currently do not or withhold enforcement if there's a pending application for a zoning request for whenever we have a conditional use case. If they have an application on file, then enforcement will be.
I think some of it is they don't know what to apply for yet. That's the challenge, is they just don't know what to apply for yet. They know something's coming, so they're not sure what to apply for yet. So.
and once the commission makes the decision on what the process is, then they will have.
Then they know. And then we're there. We're getting close. I appreciate all the works, big topic. So.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think, Tom, I like your idea. I think it's a merited idea. We're working towards a process. Okay. Thank you.
You bet. There are two other items. I don't know if you want to talk about those or.
Are any of them controversial?
Slightly. Am I standing up in front of you? Yes.
Yeah, let's move.
Okay. All right. So this one is event centers in the county. So we're just rolling with the hits. Okay. Fantastic. Everyone ready? Here we go. So event centers in the county, again, same purpose as the last one. So thank you so much for the discussion on that one. Looking forward to input on this one. So this is what we'll cover. Same format as the last one. In terms of background, so in 2016, there were changes to the Unified Zoning Code, which would allowed event centers in the county by right if the property owner had more than 20 acres. If less than 20 acres, then they had to apply for a conditional use. So those were the two routes that they had. In 2023, this topic really came up because of some complaints. And also there were a fair number of cases for new event centers that had come forward to you. And that transitioned from 2023 also into 2024. There's been a number of staff meetings on this topic to talk through. And really, I think those were to talk about what's happening in the rest of the country and other communities. And we'll see a little bit of that highlighted here. So what is an event center? These are premises that are frequently rented out, but not on a repeated or regular schedule, and they're for events. So they're currently permitted in the zoning districts, limited commercial, general commercial, limited industrial, and general industrial. And then in rural residential, which is the vast majority of the ones that you see, if you've got 20 acres or more, and it's in compliance with the supplementary use conditions, then it's permitted by right. If the property is less than 20 acres, then a conditional use is required. And some of the things that are required as part of this is parking. So there's a certain number of parking spaces folks have to provide. And in some instances, that actually sets a cap on how many people can be at the premise because of the amount of parking spaces that they can provide there. Also, lighting is addressed in terms of it's got to be shielded, downcast, can't trespass on the neighbor's properties. So that's existing. This is the page from the code. I'm not going to read this all to you, but I just want to reference that it's in there. So part of the work that we did was looking at what other communities do. Here are the communities that we surveyed. And there's the report, I believe, in your packet. I'm not going to go in depth into it, but just to say, similar to short-term rentals, this is a topic that a lot of communities are wrestling with. You can see here, 20% of them had regulations in place when we contacted them. 20% were working on regulations, and then 60% were doing it on a case-by-case basis. So we're not alone in terms of this topic. Likewise, nationally, the American Planning Association provided a document, produced a document on these, and highlighted different concerns and how different counties across the country have tackled those. So now we get to the fun part, which is the possible changes. And again, very much in draft, very interested to see what your thoughts are on this. So there are three things that could change. The last one, we really talked about the zoning code, and then we ended up talking also about tax policy. In this one, there's a possibility of zoning code changes, comprehensive plan changes, and then a question too about an interest. Is there an interest for permits? And some of this we've got more fleshed out than other portions. We'll go through that. So in your packet, there's text for amendments and possible amendments to the zoning code. So you can review that at your leisure and see the specific language in there. So here are some of the possible changes. So one of them would be to require that the property owners would have 40 acres of contiguous property. So currently, again, it's 20 acres, and they can do it by right if they meet certain conditions. So this would say you've got to have 40 acres. It doesn't all have to be one parcel. It doesn't have to be one property. You could have multiple properties that you own, as long as they're contiguous, adds up to 40 acres. Then you could do a event center. The other thing too is that if it's in the rural residential district, you would have the ability to go through the conditional use process and request that that be waived, that requirement be waived. So that's a question for you all is, do we have the size right? Is that the right size? And B, should there be the ability for folks to request a waiver of that requirement? And I don't need an answer right now. It's just something to think about.
Could you just give and indicate what was the thought process behind the 40 acres?
Yeah.
That number?
Well, part of it is because we've seen a lot of applications come in with like 7 acres, 5 acres, really small lots. And we know that a lot of those are located to other small lots, because when people go in and they start breaking up land, it's generally in an area. The other thing too is then we got to thinking, well, what about 50 acres? Well, that's a lot. The other thing too is that 40 acres, when you break out a section of land in quarter sections, that's how we came to 40 acres. And again, don't know if it's the right fit, but this is a starting point for the conversation. So the other thing too is in setbacks, and this is really kind of a carryover in the way of thinking from kind of solar, because a lot of this came up during solar, which is, so we said, how about a 200-foot minimum setback from the property line? Right now it's 100 feet, if my memory serves me correctly, and then 300 feet from residential dwellings that aren't on the site, which again, the site would include all the properties that the property owners owns, so the 40 acres. So this is a graphic to kind of represent that. And now one thing I'll tell you is I've neglected to put in the blue box down here, but you've got 200 feet around the perimeter. And in this instance, you can barely see it, but there is a house located here. So you go out 300 feet and you can see there's a little bit more of a curve right here. So that's how it comes out to play. In looking at it, a lot of people don't build their homes right on their property line. So you're only going to have a little bit of overlap generally from that 200 to 300. So that's just how they interface with each other. So again, there would be one on the front. I just did not get that added. So again, the other question for you is question about the acreage, question about should it be waived, question about the sizes. Do we get the setbacks right? And the thinking there that if we can get the things that are generating the noise and the activity away from the neighboring properties, it can reduce the impact that they're having to the neighbors. Maximum number of guests. So this also would be a change. So for this one, no more than 299 unless permitted through a different process. And that's really kind of forecasting towards the permit process. If there is a permit process, if there's not, then we can talk about that too. But the reason why we arrived at 299 is I believe that's because a building and fire code, in terms of you get above 299, you need sprinkles, a sprinkler system inside the facility. I think of cupcakes, but so then in terms of hours of operation, this is something that we've tried to standardize as we go through with these zoning cases. And so start time at 9 o'clock, ending at 9 o'clock generally for Sunday through Thursday, and then midnight Friday to Saturday. But then we also got to thinking about the noise factor and neighbors again. And so no amplified music, or really I should say amplified sound, after 10 p.m. so that they can continue their event or the function. They just can't be blasting the stereo or having the microphones and stuff going. Okay. In terms of screening, because of the distance separations with the setbacks, the idea here was that it would not be required unless it was added as a condition during the review process. And then for the site plan, that they would be required in both instances, whether it's by right or permitted through a conditional use process. So conditional use, again, would be required in rural residential. So they would have to go through that, again, with a minimum acreage size of 40 acres. And by right, it would be permitted by right, wouldn't have to go through that review process. If you've got the acreage, you meet all the standards, and you're in the LC, GC, LI, and GI zoning districts. And then again, site plan required for all those. So that's what we got for the zoning code. So now we're going to transition to the comprehensive plan. Our comp plan, what it has is it's got the map that shows the different land uses and urban growth areas, but they also have a section on locational guidelines. We've not fleshed this out, but I think there's a real opportunity to provide recommendations to insights for how we provide recommendations to the Planning Commission when it's appropriate to recommend approval, when we should be recommending denial. These types of this language will help us to kind of go through a matrix and figure out what our recommendation should be. We don't have it developed yet, but I want to plug the idea that we need to get that there. Then the third item then is permitting. And this would be for, and this is a rough concept. We've not fleshed this out. This has come up in some other meetings that we've discussed. So the idea here is if you want to exceed the 299 individuals at a property that has the appropriate zoning, then you would have to go through this process. Or if you want to have, I want to have a birthday party for one of my kids and I want to have 500 people there. If I go through the process, and I'm not sure exactly what that limit would be in terms of people, but you get to a certain amount of people, would have to go through this process as well, even for a private event that's not collecting a fee. So now, part of it that we're looking at too is, should there be an attendance maximum for that? Should there be hours, lighting? I mean, many of the things that you see addressed with zoning cases, I think those are questions about how they should be addressed, if they should be addressed through a permitting process. We don't have that fleshed out yet, but I want to acknowledge that that's part of the conversation. So, okay. So that's the framework that we've got put together. In terms of the review process, it matches up with the other one as well. So we're kind of on the same train in terms of schedule. So with that, any questions or comments?
Let me go back to your definitions. Seems like a strange place to start, but it says that its premises are not frequently rented out for public or private activities that are not repeated on a weekly basis. That not repeated on a weekly basis kind of bothers me a little bit because I understand that there's a rodeo thing out here that goes on about every week. So is that your definition then? How does that apply to something that is going to happen every week?
That is a great question, and I will defer to either Kelly or JR if they want to help me out with that one.
Kelly Dixon, Metropolitan Area Building. So rodeos has a totally separate definition in the zoning code and has its own requirements. So it's different from an event center. A rodeo can have an event center, but it's separate in the zoning code.
But the one I'm thinking about is out by Bentley.
Yes.
They
So
play music.
the one
they do
out
all
by
kinds of
Bentley
things.
is currently an illegal operation from head to toe, and we have them in court. So
But somehow your definition has to incorporate something like that, because it is an event center.
well, in that particular case, it's not. It doesn't meet that requirement because a rodeo has a separate definition. And as far as doing it from week to week, so I think that the definition breakdown, correct me if I'm wrong, they're renting it out every weekend, an event center, but they're doing it to different people. So it's not an event center. It can't be one group that has activities every weekend of the year.
So you're
At that
saying that we're
location.
going to have one set of rules for event centers that's specifically tailored to that, and another set of rules we haven't started developing yet for something like the rodeos?
I'd have to look at what we have for rodeos. I'm not.
Well, I think we got more work to do on that area. And I agree that you're going to have to address lighting, sound, hours, and so forth. But on your one slide that talks about the timing, I think you're going to have a start time for the music. Because if it starts at 9 o'clock in the morning, there's going to be a lot of people not happy.
Okay.
So your hours of operation, you could say no amplified after 10 p.m., but no amplified before
Yeah.
what time? Those are my main concerns with where you're at right now. We've got to get something going because this is getting out of hand out in the country, because every single day we're getting more of these things. Not every day, but very frequently.
The amplified music after 10 p.m. Is that indoor and outdoor, or is that just?
At this point, it'd be for both.
We've all been
But
at receptions.
Whether we need
wedding
to,
receptions.
yeah, we can
Past 10
certainly
p.m.
tweak that.
So with the setbacks, if you've got amplified music, it doesn't just stop at the property line.
That's right.
So I know we've never had anything on decibels or anything beyond the property line, but lighting and noise going beyond the property line, we're going to have to address somehow.
Yeah, and that's we had a discussion about that because noise has come up quite a bit with these, and getting a sound meter out there and doing the measurements. We really think that time is an easier way to do that. So it's just easy to tell if it's past 11 o'clock and someone's got the band going and they got amplifiers and everything out there. That's pretty easy as opposed to doing the noise meter. So that's why we stuck with time.
Any other questions here? Commissioner Lopez.
I struggle with the 299 for the permitting. I think it should be a lot lower than that. There was a party out close to me over the weekend that had 300 people, and it was I live 5 minute drive, and I could hear the bass from my house in bed. So I struggle with it being that large of a number before we have to ask for permitting. I think it should be maybe around 100. What are we doing for enforcement? Because right now, this party that I mentioned went until 3:30 in the morning. It didn't even start until 10:30 at night. There was over 300 people. There's strobe lights that went out over a block away, and they have it's on like a 5 acres. And this is not the first, second, or third time this has happened recently. So I just don't know. There's nothing we can do about it right now. I mean, they call 911 and sheriff says too bad. I mean, there's nothing they can do. So what is it that we're going to do for enforcement that can shut these down? Because when a neighbor lives 100 feet away and their windows are rattling, pictures are falling off the wall, I mean, we have to be able to do something for these people.
And I'm going to defer to Kelly.
We send Kelly Dixon.
Thank you, Kelly.
The answer to your first question is nothing. In the particular case you're talking about, that's a private individual having a private party, and we have no regulations on the books that prevent them from doing what they're doing currently. So there is no enforcement to date. the permitting process that he was talking about. I'd like to, another way of describing it would be a special event permit. In other words, if you're going to have an activity over X number of people, let's just say 100, then you would have to get this. Now, this is for, like I say, your private birthday party, family gathering, or if you're going to have a concert, you would have to get this permit. Then these are all preliminary discussions that stem from a meeting that we had with you a while back, that this code may not be best placed in zoning, but it'd be somewhere where law enforcement would have the ability to go out and shut it down if they exceed any of the requirements we talked about.
So even if, so this was an event venue that we voted down because I think
Correct.
it was on 5 acres or something. And the barn wasn't up to code and all these things like that. So even though it doesn't hit the minimum requirement to have an event that large, it still is okay because because they have 500 family members every other week that come to their house and party until
Today, yes. That would be something, though, that this other process that we're discussing, the permitting process, could address. But it would, in my opinion, and just my opinion, it would need to be something that could be enforced by law enforcement.
I agree.
As opposed to zoning, because I can't go out there on Saturday night and do that inspection. But law enforcement can, and they can, when they get those complaints, at the same time you were visiting one the other night, we had another one going on in the north end of the county, which had 500 plus people at it. And it was not the rodeo arena. It was a new place.
Yeah.
I just heard about that yesterday. So we do need to do something, and it does need to be something where law enforcement has the enforcement actions as opposed to the building department.
Yeah, that's what I need. Thank you.
It's helpful. Mission.
Well, it just seems like if we don't approve one of these requests, there's really not much we can do in terms of someone basically having an unregulated, unrecognized business. They might be making money that we can't determine. They can have 1,000 of their friends out and party all night and do whatever they want. And there's really nothing in the county that says that they can't do those things
Currently,
unless it's a business. I mean, if it's a business, they're registered as a business and they're conducting, financial transactions as a business, I think that becomes much more regulatable. But apart from being registered as a business, I'm not sure that someone on their, that wants to have 1,000 people out to have fun all night long, they could do that, could they not?
today, that's correct.
Is there any way to look at that and say, we believe in what you're doing here as a business and we would like to?
We have the burden of proof, and unless we can prove that money exchanged hands, we have nothing to take to court.
So as long as it's not something we can prove, they can do whatever they want, pretty much.
Currently.
Okay. And then in terms of event center, we have this idea there's going to be a wedding reception and there's going to be a birthday party. But the word event really is a much larger word than that. It could be all kinds of things much beyond. It could be an outdoor event. It could be an activity event. It could be, maybe it's a car race, for example, on their property. Is that an event?
That would be considered outdoor entertainment under the code.
Seems like an event should be defined somewhere. I don't know that we're talking about all kinds of things I can imagine in my mind that might be something that would fall under this, but may not be intended. So I want to be careful what we're talking about.
Well, I mean, the code that we're discussing today is an event center in the county, and we have a specific definition for that. And it would be under the recommendations would be limited to 299 people.
And if it was a huge,
if they wanted to go more than that, they would have to come before the board to get that approval through a conditional use.
And I think that all depends on the size of the facility. If they have the large piece of property, a super large facility, I don't know that number makes a lot of sense necessarily. It kind of depends on how much land we're talking about and what's the size of that building. But an event center could certainly be much larger than 299. If it was like the old Kansas Coliseum or something, that was much larger than that, but it's got to have a facility of land comment.
I think that what we're recommending in that case is that they have to come before the governing body to get permission to do things larger than that minimum or that maximum size.
For a permanent, for a variance that's ongoing, or just something for.
Well,
a
a conditional use,
specific
it
event.
goes with the property. So the conditional use, if they come in and say, you know, we want to do this event. We want to do this event center. It's going to be so many thousand square feet. We have the availability of city water, so we can sprinkle it. We want to have at least 600 people. They would bring that to you as a conditional use request for you to approve. Once you approve that, then that stays with the property.
All right, well, just much like the previous presentation, I feel like they ought to be required to be registered as a business. They should have some insurance that covers that type of commercial activity. And those things ought to be something they attest to. Maybe we don't have to inspect their documentation, but we need to attest to get approved through whatever process we're going to create, that they are compliant, or they're at least aware of the requirements and they're compliant, at least on paper. They can say, yes, we're doing those things. I also don't know if I agree with the sound stuff as it's worded here, because again, if it was a very large, say it's a mile section and they're in the middle of the mile section, I don't know that I care about this that much, this sound and light stuff. But if there's a small lot, like a 5-acre lot, and they're right next to the lot lines, and there's a house, 300 feet away, that noise issue becomes a much bigger issue. And I mentioned this before in some of our cases that came before us. I know that, again, if it's not an event center and it's not regulated, and they could do whatever they want, they could shoot guns at midnight if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to get involved in those issues. They can run 4-wheelers and have bonfires. They can do all kinds of things. But once it's a registered business and we're regulating that, I think the rules ought to apply. And some of these rules in this particular case, I think that this issue of sound, I'm only thinking about what happens when the noise crosses a property line. I know we don't like this, but rather than us being the ones that actually measures and regulates and tries to police this, I think this ought to be in the code only for the issues of a civil dispute that can be, if property owners are attesting, if you will, that the noise was way too loud, and they have a way to prove that. And I, by the way, came from in my previous life, I was in a field of science called instrumentation, where we installed NTS, should say certified sensors to national standards to make measurements that were traceable to a standard. And how you measure those things it matters, and then you have to be certified to be able to even take those measurements. But if someone went through all the trouble of saying that the noise exceeded some level at my property line, if they had that documentation and wanted to have a civil dispute in front of a judge, they ought to be able to do that. I don't want to get involved in all that. But I think we ought to say, in terms of regulating this, it should not exceed some decibel level after some time of the day at their lot lines. It's up to them to prove it.
Well, and I'll go to our attorneys, but I mean, if we're gonna write something like that in the code, then it's my opinion, it'd be something we would have to be able to enforce. And so I think, in my opinion, a neighbor that feels like they're being harmed by another neighbor making too much noise can get a decibel reader and use that in court, that they're being harmed in a civil action. But I think if we put it into our code, is something that would then we would be required to enforce.
Well, if there's nothing in the code that says what's too loud, then even if they went through all that extra work, it wouldn't matter, because there's no threshold of what's allowed and what's not allowed. I'm simply saying what's reasonable if someone, and I would suggest someone doesn't go buy their own sound meter and doesn't take those measurements on their own, because they're not qualified to do that. It's not traceable. It's not really admittable in court, in my opinion.
Well, what I would like to offer is just say thank you for the feedback. And it's a complicated issue, and I don't know that we'll be able to resolve it right now, but I appreciate the feedback, and it's something that we'll look into.
I'll concede my concern right now, but I don't know that this is the right way to handle that. Thank you.
Okay, thank
I have
you.
one more question, but probably for over here. So if this is enforcement's not going to be in zoning and that piece of it, then what's the next step to get enforcement started? Because I mean,
Yeah,
how long are we gonna let this go with nothing?
Yeah, and the sheriff's not here. I'm listening to the discussion, but if you're going to have event center, and I'm going to ask Scott to tell me what the city does. In the city, there is a noise ordinance and there's nuisance types of ordinance where law enforcement can go in and take an action against somebody's disturbing somebody else's peace, and they can go do something. I'll tell you from the sheriff's perspective, and that's, I'm glad you brought up the number, 299, 399, 599. You at night, when you look at a facility and you're sitting there trying to guess how many people in there, it's impossible. We've been on the enforcement side of that. It's really tough. Sheriff on any given night has 6 to 10 deputies out there. If he was going to venture in and try to count one of these out, it is trouble. It is almost unenforceable. What we're in a loop of right now is the county's getting big enough that we're having more of these event centers show up because people are looking for avenue to have fun, and the city's not offering that, so they're coming out in the county and they're gonna do it. We have no noise, it's no nuisance ordinance. We have no way to stop this. So if they come and they apply to you guys for a event center and you deny it, they're going to just do what they do anyway. And we seem to have no way to stop it because we don't have the nuisance or noise ordinance in effect. The decision for the elected body is, are we big enough? Are we urban enough now that we have to look at a nuisance noise component? And then you could have a serious discussion about event center and how to try to keep this under control. But until then, it's going to be very, very difficult. So, and I would really like the sheriff's input on this if we're going to have this discussion further, because he's the one and his deputies are the one that inherit this issue, that whatever regulation we come up with, he's going to be the enforcer. We don't have a mechanism to enforce. Kelly can't go out and count these things out. MABC does not have the staff to do it. It's going to come down to law enforcement enforcing this. So as far as next step, I think I'm open for suggesting, but I think we ought to have sheriff come in and talk about what his opinion of nuisance noise is. And then the question for you all is the county big enough now? Are we urban enough now that you have to consider something like that? I know we have not wanted to talk about that in the past because it's different in the county than it is in the city. But are we now to the point where we're getting so many people living out there and there's so much peace being disturbed that we have to reconcile this?
Okay, thank you.
I would just add very briefly, not that it hasn't happened in the county before, but this is kind of an evolution. In the city, you would have people who would open businesses that were not regulated, and they would do illegal things in those businesses. And then it became a legal question of whether law enforcement had entry rights because they weren't registered as a business. They weren't licensed to do certain things that they were doing inside. And now you're seeing that in the county where they're basically engaged in what would otherwise be deemed illegal activities, but they're not registered as a business. They're not licensed by ABC for liquor sales. They're not licensed by anybody to do anything. And it's a free for all. And for the sheriff to pull up, I saw a note a couple of weeks ago where there was a property out in the county that was having one of these big unauthorized, it was advertised publicly. So it was obviously a commercial moneymaker. But as the deputy rolls past the property to check the noise complaint, there are 2 people armed at the entry with assault rifles. And the deputy, having only a few deputies across the county to back him up, doesn't necessarily have a lawful right to enter that property because it's not registered as a business. And they've got armed security standing at the gate. So the deputy confirms that there's something going on there, but he's not going to enter that property because it's unsafe.
We used to call them rave parties.
Yes.
Whenever
So, from a safety perspective, when one of these turns into a raging gunfight and multiple people are shot,
Yeah, we don't want that.
at some point, there's something's going to have to be done to regulate. So.
Man, that's
Scott had another issue to talk about. I think we're out of time for today. But we could get Scott back to talk about his signage issue. And then I'd like to reconvene the discussion about event centers. I'd like to have Sheriff here.
yeah, we need Sheriff Easter's input on this. Okay, we're out of time. Scott, thank you. And thanks MABCD, thanks planning, thanks everyone for all the work you went into all of this. It's been a lot of work. So Justin, guys, thank you so much. Okay. That is all. We'll see you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m.